Howdy, folks. Happy Friday. Thank God it's Friday. We are 7 days away, 7 days and counting towards the NHL trade deadline. We've had a couple deals since our last show. We talked about Chris Tanev. That went down. And then last night, Ilya Lyubushkin went down. And we'll talk about both of those in a minute. But we'll start with the pre-show with Russ in a hazy background.
Too bad about the hazy background. Anyhow, I watched a little of the NFL Combine yesterday and really like 5 minutes of it. But I was watching the linebackers, and some of these guys are like 255 pounds, and they're running like a 4.5, 4.6 in the 40, which is insane because if you probably go back 20 years, that would probably be like a world record. So now, like, I didn't watch the wide receivers, but, you know, I write about football prospects, so I know that some of the times are like 4.45, and you know, it's insane to watch these big guys run this fast. What does it do for football? You know, not a lot, but you just want to know what kind of athlete they are, make sure they're not fat, and make sure they actually can, you know, move around. But it is fun to see that kind of speed.
I refuse to watch the combine simply because, I mean, it just, you know, I'll pick up stuff from like the NFL insiders and people on local radio. But I did see, like, you know, how you had on Facebook or YouTube, you have the little video snippets. There was a tight end from Georgia, and I think Darnell Washington was his name.
Yeah, he's a biggie.
And he's 6'7".
Yep. 260
pounds, something like that. And he ran a 4.5 40, which is ridiculous. And he's got these massive strides. So it's like Secretariat that's so wide.
Yeah, but what did Pete Metzelaars run? He was a big guy. he ran like a 40-minute mile. He was so slow. but at least he was like 6'7". But no, yeah. But the funny thing about this guy is, you know, he made a catch. And, you know, we know that these guys are unbelievably talented, but it was like a 30-yard pass, and he made this catch one-handed with the ball. I mean, he grabbed the football. His hand span was so wide that he grabbed the ball one-handed, and it was a bullet. And I'm like, these guys aren't human. Don't worry, Baker Mayfield would still miss it if
they're human, but they're just they're more physically evolved than we are.
Yes.
Yeah, no, we're just a bunch of old men. We're just a bunch of old guys complaining about it.
Yeah,
I'm not complaining. I think it's amazing.
Oh, it is amazing. And the other one was they were talking about this on local radio, was a defensive end from Penn State named Chop Robinson, and he's probably a first round
Chop Robinson, right?
Yeah, and he ran a 4.4 40. A defensive end who ran a 4. I mean, no, please. You know, Bruce Smith couldn't run a 4.4. Well, yeah, Bruce Smith was too busy being asleep at the wheel. But I'm sorry.
But also in this draft, we have both a pork chop and a Kool-Aid in this one.
Yeah. There's all kinds of there's all kinds.
I always start thinking of the East-West Bowl with Key and Peele.
Oh, jeez. All right, let's start the show. Hello, Hockey World. Today is Friday, March the 1st. 2024.
I'm Pete Tessie in balmy Winnipeg.
I'm Anthony Mingione, Center Ice Philly.
Russ Cohen from Sportsology, and it's all downhill from here.
And I'm Michael Agello with my great background, and this is the Hockey Buzzcast here on HockeyBuzz.com. Hey, I've got guitars, I got books, I got the Titanic.
Never used guitars. Well, the Titanic makes sense.
Titanic makes sense because I cover the Maple Leafs and the Buffalo Bills. It would make sense for Russ. He should have that for the Mets. Okay, but we'll start chronologically because what was it? A couple hours after our show on Wednesday, the Chris Tanev deal came down. And it was not a complex deal, but, you know, there's a conditional pick in there. But essentially, it was a second-round pick, a defenseman, Artem Grushnikov, a conditional third-round pick going to the Calgary Flames, and then a fourth-round pick going to the New Jersey Devils, which is the chic thing now, is the third team getting involved, them retaining 25% and getting a low to mid-round draft pick. But it does give the Dallas Stars cap relief on Tanev, who I think the cap hit is like around $1.2 million for a very useful defensive defenseman. And, Pete, we'll go to you first because we were talking about Tanev in connection to the Winnipeg Jets. And, a number of teams were in on them. Apparently it was Winnipeg, it was Winnipeg, it was Toronto, it was Vancouver, Edmonton was there, but Dallas won out. And apparently they won out because they liked the prospect. But what did you think of this deal?
So my first thought of the deal was when it got announced, I'm going to do a little shame on a bunch of people who know better. That was some of the most confusing and convoluted explanations on how to explain that deal. And you know what? It wasn't earth-shattering, but the whole need to be first came out that said it noted reputable people came out saying Dallas traded Tanev with 75% retained. Yes, it was retained. What they should have said was Calgary traded Tanev and Dallas only pays 25%. Then sorted out. It was convoluted. Then you saw all the explanations of how it actually went, which is more interesting because that showed the nature of how the deals could work. And what happened the next day? The exact same thing happened with the Leafs. So shame on people. Like the need to be first isn't important. The need to provide context and illustrate the intricacies of how this works, it's actually way more interesting than, hey, the trade happened. I think it's a great move for Calgary. I saw a couple funny tweets that said the Stars and Calgary and the Flames made a very significant trade in 1995, and that seemed to work out okay for both sides. Yeah. This is not that kind of deal, folks.
No.
I don't think Grushnikov is Jerome McGinn.
But it was also, I felt there was a major running towards like Dallas got a steal in this trade, and I thought it was a good acquisition for Dallas, and I thought it was a good return for Calgary.
And I because I want to bring this up when we talk about Philadelphia and Sean Walker, but the narrative out there about them wanting a first round pick in this deal is what led everybody to believe that Dallas got a steal because they didn't give up a first round pick. And the issue here, Russ. I mean, I know that a number of people are saying, well, this draft isn't really good past 20, and the first round pick. I mean, every draft there's an ability for somebody to draft somebody good late in the first round. It doesn't matter if the draft is good or the draft is bad. I mean, they were going to lose Tanev for nothing at the end of the year, so getting anything of consequence was a good thing. And they got Grushnikov, who apparently they like, and they got a second round pick, and they got a conditional pick if they go to the final. That's not a bad deal for Calgary.
No, but people, because of what you said before that, had these unrealistic expectations. And then I see, article headlines. Did they sell low? No, they didn't sell low. This was the best they could do. And I think people and fans and some media are going to be surprised at what the best some of these GMs can do. Right. And the thing is, and that's where sometimes you're better off acting first and waiting till the end these days, because teams want to do it early. And if you wait till the end, in the old days, wait until the end used to be the best thing. It's not always the best thing anymore.
And I think that's the mistake people are making. I still think people are tied into these old antiquated ways of thinking that if you wait until the very last second, you're going to get the best possible deal. And I don't think it doesn't work I don't think it works that way anymore.
Hey, you know what? Just remember, with draft picks, you're getting a lottery ticket. Mm-hmm. And the hedge is how many numbers are pre-selected on that lottery ticket. And that's the higher the pick.
Well,
if you've got a good scouting department, you've got a good underlying system that can scout, and you understand where your turnover, age gap, and talent deficiencies are, a good prospect is way more valuable than a draft pick if you've done the homework. And so in this case, people may say Calgary didn't get what they should have. Maybe they actually got what's better for them. with less risk.
Well,
this is a risk management game as much as just a player acquisition game.
Yeah, they haven't drafted well lately, so actually getting some other teams' prospects are a good idea sometimes.
And Dallas has a history of drafting good. I mean, they've drafted Lindell, they drafted Heiskanen, they drafted Harley's been pretty good.
Yeah.
So they've had a record here of drafting defensemen and drafting them well. As we welcome Jan Levine to the show, but let me just say this and go around the table here. I think the thing that we, as sort of independent reporters who are looking at the landscape of the deadline, going a couple weeks before leading up toward March the 8th, the issue here is we have the ability to sort of look through the bullshit, and we know, like with Tanev, and Tanev has been shopped all year. And the narrative that came out about them wanting a first-round pick was directed at one place, Toronto. And when you put it out there, and everybody knew that the Leafs were interested in Tanev, and that was the demand of on the Leafs. And then what they ended up getting, could you say that a guy who was drafted in the second round a couple years ago and a second-round pick is the equivalent of a first-round pick? You could argue that. I think that's something. So what Dallas did is set the market, and to some extent, the teams that had defensemen after that are going to pay the price in that respect, because now we'll go to Anthony on the Sean Walker thing. There's not a chance in hell that they're getting a first-round pick for Sean Walker. I'm sorry, there's no.
If it's Sean Walker by himself, if you think you're going to elicit a first-round pick for Sean Walker, that's not going to happen. The only way the Flyers are going to be able to extract a first-round pick is going to be.
There's a possibility of a trade. They sat him down this week. They had a conversation with him.
I don't know. Somebody's got audio playing on their. Is that you?
Situation like
I don't.
They're petrified. They want to try.
It's Peter. Something's playing in the background on you.
Yeah, I think it's Pete.
Yeah, no,
there goes. Is that better?
Okay, that's better.
Yeah.
So the only way I see this, Michael, in terms of if the Flyers are trying like heck to get a first round pick, you have to be creative. There's got to be more involved than just Sean Walker to extract a first round pick. And the question's going to be, how much are you taking off your roster this season in order to achieve that goal? And I think the Flyer, again, and this is the reason why we're starting to see sort of other information coming out. Oh, they're negotiating, and they've got an idea on the AAV, but they don't have an idea on the term. And I mean, if you can't see through the whole, this is, making sure that's out there so that other teams up their ante a little bit more.
Right.
I don't know what else to tell you.
Yeah, I mean, their situation is difficult because, okay, like with Tanev and the Leafs and Calgary, they floated out the first round pick. That was the price. And Walker, both of you guys who are covering the Flyers and see them all the time said Walker was playing really well early on, but I don't know if it was you, Anthony, or you, Russ, that said his play has dropped off.
The offense definitely has dropped off. He had a goal the other night, but that was the first one in a while. So
yeah. So I mean,
and also in the role that he was been in, and also the ice time, because he was their primary offensive defenseman, and then when they acquired Jamie Drysdale, that time got cut into.
But now it's like, okay, and now we have the usual game that we have a week before the deadline, where we have the carrot and the stick, where we may be talking contract with Sean Walker, so it's the whole deal. Like, okay, well, if they're talking contract, then he might be off the board, so we have to up our offer if we want the guy.
I think this is a lot of information that gets leaked. Again. My read on this whole situation is, again, this is all fog. Again, at the end of the day, this is all fog of war. It is what it is. It's fog of war. Nobody really knows anything. Everything's getting floated out because this is all part of the chess match. This is all part of the chess match to see which general manager who's interested in your player is willing to blink and at least come closer to your price.
Right, and that'll be the key. Now, the
one thing I'll just add this, Mike, about Philly is they have to walk away from the deadline with some things. If they don't, then people are going to say you really did no better than Chuck Fletcher. Like that's going to be a thing if that happens.
Well,
so that's why they have to do some things.
Well, okay, so let's define the something. Are we saying if you trade? Okay, you can't. I think the worst case scenario here for the Flyers, for Danny Briere, is to keep Sealer and Walker and miss the playoffs. If they do that,
that's the doomsday. That's the doomsday.
Right.
Otherwise, you're looking at this as otherwise, very much you're looking at these guys as own rentals, basically, which you hate to use that phrase, but it's the truth. That's exactly what you're doing in this circumstance, is counting on those guys getting you there.
Now, and the thing is, Anthony, if they keep them, then they almost in a way, and they're not going to do this. They should add at the deadline, because if you keep Sealer and Walker, you have to make the playoffs. And I don't think they're going to add. They're not going to add at all. I think they're going to, they might be a team that subtracts Walker and Sealer and then adds somebody else. They could do that. But
the other possibility is that they add, if there is a trade where they're going to get a pick in return that is going to be palatable to them, are they taking on another player in return in addition to that pick that the other team doesn't want anymore?
Yeah.
That's part of it.
Mark Stahl for a seventh's not good enough. Like nobody will care about that.
Right. And that's not
exactly. But again, this team is also in a spot where when we were looking at them during the season, we kind of felt that this was sort of a ride it out and see how far this group goes on its own. But if you don't make it, you're right, Mike. It is kind of the worst case scenario where you had opportunities to add assets that you weren't able to add at the deadline. So there's an absolute risk that's involved here.
Yeah. Now the other deal, less consequential than the Tanev deal, but I think, obviously, it will have an effect, is the Ilya Lyubushkin deal made last night by the Leafs with Anaheim. It was a third-round pick in 2025 going to the Ducks. The Ducks retain 50%, and then it gets filtered through Carolina. And the Leafs give Carolina a 6th-round pick. And we'll talk about Lyubushkin in a second, but I want to talk about this, Jan, and I want to get Jan in the conversation. The thing that's interesting here is, in the Tanev deal, the New Jersey Devils were the third party, and they retained 25%, and they got a 4th-round pick. Now, that was understandable on the part of the Devils because they have Dougie Hamilton's $9.5 million contract on LTIR. They have a lot of cap room, and they may be sellers at the deadline. All of a sudden, Tyler Toffoli's name is popping up in trade rumors. So they may be sellers. They may think that they're out of range. Carolina is a contender. Carolina, in all intents and purposes, all the reports is they're going to add. Why would they be a filter of almost $700,000 for a 6th-round draft pick? And they're not, they don't have a ton of cap space. It doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, to the Devils, it makes sense, Jan. To Carolina, it doesn't at all.
I think Carolina is going to try to take that 6th-rounder and flip it as part of a deal, and they can use it as a supplement or a bolster to another type of a trade, right? Right now, they're 5 points behind the Rangers for first place in the Metro. Mm-hmm. Every pick is somewhat valuable, right? You can package a 3 and a 6 or a 4 and a 6 and try to get some kind of depth guy, and that team is willing to eat the salary based upon the fact that you threw in the 6th. That may negate what you just spent in terms of the $700,000. So I'm assuming that they figure in Carolina that, hey, you know what? It's good practice. We get an extra pick. We can utilize that pick as supplemental components associated with a deal. And if not, all right, so big deal. So we took on $700,000 and we still got a 6th-round pick that we can use next year at the draft or trade at the draft also.
Yeah, Russ.
The other rumor on that, Jan, is that Patrick Allvin is holding out for another 6th-round pick to trade Pettersson to Carolina.
Yeah. I was going to make that joke too. So yeah.
But I 100% agree with Jan. Jan's right on that.
Yeah, and I mean, I was going to get to that, but since you brought it up here, Peter, the talk about the Elias Pettersson talk over the last 48 hours, and then it was a report from, I think, Frank Cervelli, and then Elliot confirmed it, that there was serious talk. They didn't say if names or players were exchanged, but serious talk about a deal between Carolina and Vancouver regarding Elias Pettersson. And they somehow think that this was leaked out there to jumpstart some conversations between the Canucks and Pettersson. It's like, okay, they've wanted to sign him all year, and he's basically saying no. And this is a back and forth between the two sides where the Canucks are basically saying, we want to get you signed. We want to get you signed now. And if we can't get you signed now, we're not going to go down the same friggin' road as Matthew Tkachuk in Calgary. So give us an answer. That's what's going. I mean, that's my interpretation of what's going on here.
I mean, look, there's no question that Rutherford's putting out this information and nobody's really buying it, and he's not getting traded, and Carolina doesn't want to pay Pettersson, okay? They don't want to pay their guys sometimes. So why would they want to take on that contract? They would have to trade Aho in return. Like, that's what they'd have to do.
Well, that makes no sense for Carolina.
I know, but I'm just telling you, they don't take on that kind of salary.
No, but I mean, what they're probably thinking is we could trade Neckish, we could trade Seth Jarvis, or we could trade Neckish and one of the defensemen, or maybe Pesci or something like that. I mean, I don't know. I mean,
and then Vancouver's playoff hopes get
right,
killed.
And that's my point, Peter. It's like this is not constructive. Going into you're a month away, a little over a month away from the playoffs, and you're talking about trading your best or second best player. I mean, what the hell is going on here? Why bring it up now, Peter?
Well, again, everything that comes out of Vancouver, you have to take with this spin of what's in the water out there, because nothing is linear, nothing is right. It's just Vancouver. And I think a lot of this has to do with the constant pressure that comes in from the fan base in its own bizarre ways. Like, people say there's pressure in Toronto. The Vancouver fan base is an incredibly active fan base. It's just there's the sheer volume of fans in the Toronto region and Montreal region are even more.
By
impressive.
active, do you mean like crazy and sometimes unhinged?
Active in the blogosphere, active in the interactive media and stuff like that, with all the different talk shows.
Very active. Yes,
they're very active. And if you understand sort of the history of what's come out of there and where it's penetrated in the NHL, it's a bit of a breeding ground for new age thinking in terms of people who have made impacts in NHL teams, whether it be in data, whether it be in other things.
Oh yeah, they've had some very smart guys,
right? And that
teams,
has
no doubt
led to something. So the pressure in there is big in a different kind of way. Personally, I saw something that really bothered me a little bit that came out. And they talked, and it was I don't even know if I should name names, but I might as well. It was the editor for the Province. His name's Paul Chapman. I believe he's the sports editor. And he put out a tweet saying, basically quote tweeting someone who had said, if Willis and Botchford and Gallagher were still around, players and stuff would really understand what accountability meant, or something along those lines. And he quote tweeted that saying, yeah. And I took that to say, wait a second, you're the editor. That's actually like if I employed you and you told me you couldn't train any more talent, that's actually a shot at yourself.
Right.
And I think part of this is that Vancouver has a disproportionate amount of media maybe to the population and the scope of the team in relation to national media, because it's the West Coast. It's 3 hours later. They have their own sort of little ecosystem of media, and it's big, it's diverse. There's a lot of different things that go on in it, and it breeds a life of itself. So when it's midnight in Toronto and New York, it's only 9 o'clock there, and things are going on that people wake up to, and it creates its own little weird challenge. And this is the kind of thing that erupts with it. And I guess the rumor coming out is that the understanding right now, or the general perception, is that Carolina leaked the trade stuff. And that's what's really kicked a lot of this into gear. Russ, we were saying before, I think earlier in the week, that this really wasn't. This is just a little bit of the classic gamesmanship. Pettersson had said, let's just play hockey. We'll deal with it in the offseason. And there's been a number of players over the years who have literally done just that. The Jets, and I think I brought up recently, the Jets had this with Hellebuck before he signed his last long-term deal.
Yeah.
He took a 1-year deal and bet on himself.
Yeah.
Pettersson took a 2-year deal. This is the end of the second year of the deal. He bet on himself. They had coaching turbulence. He needed to see where Rutherford and Alvin were going to push everything. And he needed to understand how was Tocchet going to work with him and the team and stuff.
I will say this.
I'm focusing on how do we make this such a great place for him to be with a top 3 team in the league and worry about that, because the contract will probably take care of itself if you manage to operate.
I would say this. I'm surprised it didn't come from Rutherford, but I'm not surprised that Carolina has leaked this, because if that's true, Carolina's leaked stuff before, like they have.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like Carolina does this to kind of show their fan base, look, we're trying, but yet they don't do the one thing they've always needed and get a goalie. Now, if they're actually going to play Kochetkov, maybe it'll work out. We've been saying that for, a couple of years, and it never really has happened.
And he's played well the last 6 weeks, so maybe
that'll work out. But before then, none of that. But again, I wonder about the amount of, that was a horrible look, Mike, just so you know. The amount of money
wasn't my fault.
That Carolina, it was your fault.
No, Anthony dropped off.
Closed us, and then all of a sudden my lip is quivering, and it wasn't in real life. Like, what are you trying to do to us, Mike? What kind of producer are you? Yeah, go ahead. Whatever.
That's better. Anyway, continue.
It's horrible. I'm not talking anymore.
Okay. Yeah. Good luck with that. Okay. There's something breaking here from Pierre LeBrun saying his understanding is that the Devils have informed the Flames that they would be willing now to take on Markstrom without salary retention. Whether or not that moves the needle, we shall see. So if that was
like 3 weeks later. This is 3 weeks later. He should have done this 2 weeks ago. Calgary may have just said, you know what, forget it now.
Well, yeah, maybe not. I mean, right now, you look at the situation with the Devils. They're 6 points. I think it was 6 points behind. Mm-hmm. They're 5 points behind the Flyers, 6 points behind the Lightning. So they're still in it, but they're playing both ends here because, like I said, there's talk about Toffoli being shopped. There's talk about them maybe selling some of their, whoever their UFAs are. And now, obviously, Markstrom is a long-term move. You wouldn't make those moves, or maybe you would. Maybe you're trading out players to open up room to bring in Markstrom, and you think you're good. You think you'll compete without Toffoli because he's an expiring contract. But I don't know if they really can because he's been pretty effective for them. But I mean.
He's playing a dangerous game because he's been going with the lowering retention all along here because and Calgary didn't bite. Now all of a sudden he's saying that to Calgary, and Calgary may just be like, "Listen, we moved on. Forget it."
See, but the thing is, I don't think Calgary has moved on, Peter. I think Calgary wants to move Markstrom. They've got Wolf and they've got Vladar.
Yeah,
they know they're not going to get anything for Vladar. They can get out from underneath 3 years. I think it's 2 more years of Markstrom at over $6 million. He's 34 years old. He's having a good year this year, but the last couple years, I mean, it makes no sense to keep Markstrom if you're rebuilding.
No, but they could do it at the draft. They don't have to do it now.
No,
weeks ago they were like, "Listen, we got to do this. Let's do this. Let's see what's out there." And fatigue may have just stopped the deal.
It depends, though, of what value they get. I mean, you don't know what the value is going to be like. I mean, let's face it. At the draft, I mean, Saros is going to be shopped. Merzlikins is going to be shopped. Markstrom's going to be shopped. I mean, I don't think Saros is going to be traded right now. Merzlikins, I think his value is low right now because Columbus is so bad and he looks bad. you might if you get the value or close to the value that you want from the Devils, if you're Conroy, you might want to make that deal now.
Well, but here's the downside. Like Randy's saying, Markstrom is unhappy. He came out publicly. Hey, he wasn't unhappy when he signed the deal.
Yeah.
So he doesn't really have a say. The other thing is New Jersey now says you could do this deal without retention. They're not going to offer as good of a deal. They're not giving them the same kind of deal that they would have with retention. No team does that.
Right.
So now Calgary already knows by them saying that the return's not going to be the same, and that's why I think this deal may go off the rails.
Yeah, I mean, if what they were saying was, we'll give you Alexander Holtz and a first-round pick, but you got to retain half. They're not getting that for keeping the whole whole salary. They may get one or the other, but they're not going to get both.
Right, or maybe they get a second-round pick in Holtz. Right.
And why not? If the retention is the issue, you've just seen methodologies in which you were involved in one trade on how you can spread that risk around. That's a possibility too. And Calgary should be open to it. But I mean, you know what? Calgary should not be complaining about having to retain salary, considering they're basically having a whole new arena paid for by someone else. So cry me a river to the ownership of Calgary. You put yourself in this mess. This is aside from Markstrom, I would love to know what teams do when they look at risk assessment 5, 6, 7 years down the road and how they think to manage it if something goes wrong in a contract and what they're expected to do. Because now something's wrong. There's term remaining.
Right.
You got rid of the guy who signed you, who was the visionary for the deal.
This is like the 4 or 5 players, Peter. This has been going on for multiple years. This is not just this year's thing.
Yeah.
This is like, it started with Gaudreau, and now all these guys that signed these deals when things weren't working out in Calgary, they all systematically wanted to leave.
But this is the difference, though, between the two deals that we've seen and this deal, because teams are, even contending teams, as we saw with Carolina. Teams are willing to take on salary as that third party to get paid a draft pick. Okay, Markstrom's got 2 more years, not 1 more year, 2 more years. I mean, it's not the rest. It's not an expiring contract at the end of the season. It's that plus 2 more years. Right. You have to probably give up at least a first-round pick and maybe more to get some team to take that on. And probably it's only a team like Arizona or Chicago or one of those teams that's looking to get to the cap floor. So, yeah, not San Jose because they got so much retention with Carlson and Burns, but Anaheim maybe. I mean, there's very few teams like that. So that's the problem in that situation, and that's why maybe this is a big deal that they're agreeing to not retain, but or they're agreeing to take Markstrom without having Calgary retain.
But there's going to be a price to pay for that too, and that's why. Look, I'm not saying the deal won't be made. I'm just saying this deal could have been made like 2 weeks ago. Like Calgary really wanted to do it, and New Jersey ground it to a halt. They did.
Yeah. Now
that's the way it seems.
Now, there's Anthony again. Hold on. There we go.
No driving now.
No driving.
No sunglasses.
Your screen kept flipping. And yeah. And Russ is complaining that like when you dropped off, there was a close up of me so much so that you could see my pores. And
yeah, I mean the production value was shit.
It's not me.
You didn't put the 3 of us together.
No, I didn't. It automatically happened, Russ, and I quickly pivoted to the 3-pronged view instead of.
No, you're fine. Sorry.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. But no, the interesting thing here, another thing that LeBrun reported was now Dallas. Apparently, there was some talk that Tyler Seguin might be on LTIR until the end of the regular season. Apparently he'll be back before then. So that's not going to be one of those situations where they bury him until the middle of April.
You talk about the Vegas maneuver?
The Vegas maneuver.
They're looking for another Ben Bishop.
But Evgeny Dadonov is going to be out until the end of the regular season. So I think he makes in the 2s. So they have some flexibility there. But yeah, I mean, now you've got, and this is the interesting thing. I mean, I'm really intrigued what these contending teams are going to do, because in the West now, Dallas might make another move, but I don't think they'll make another big move like Tanev. Maybe they'll trade a draft pick for a forward, for some forward depth. But, I don't think they're going to make a massive move. But, Peter, what I'm curious is what Winnipeg's going to do, what Edmonton's going to do, and what Vegas is going to do.
So what was the rumor that came out that Edmonton's first is in play, as it should be, and potentially a roster player? That was being floated around. I think I read this morning or last night, and it should be. And I think I think one name I heard associated with this, and we talked, was Walker. But I think for Edmonton to get a needle moving player, they have to have a roster in play, and I bet they might have to put another draft pick in play to deal with the cap side too. I think they're going to have to do that.
Yeah, but they're going to want somebody better than Walker. Like that
was just something I saw. I can't remember.
Yeah, I mean, if they're doing that, if they're doing a first and a roster player and something, that's more like a Hanifin deal to me.
Yeah,
right. Yeah. And now Hanifin does not make sense for Vegas, because Vegas's defense is back to health with Theodore being back, but forward wise, Eichel may be coming back pretty soon. There's talk about him maybe even playing tomorrow against the Sabres, just to probably so he could stick it in the Sabres' hearts.
Would he do that, Mike? What's his
motivation? No, he wouldn't do that at all. But Stone is going to be out the rest of the regular season, which is why the talk is, Gensel and basically any big forward that's out there.
But who are they giving up to get Gensel?
I know.
Like their pipeline is pretty bereft to a certain extent, given how many deals they've made.
Well, okay, if you're talking about Vegas, it's probably Brendan Brisson and a first-round pick.
I don't know if that's going to be enough to move the needle for.
It might be. Brendan Brisson's really good. I mean,
and remember who Sidney Crosby is. Remember who Sidney Crosby is represented by.
Right.
Yeah, I know.
Brisson. It might be the only circumstance here where Sidney would kind of be like, "All right, I get it."
Yeah, and then.
Yeah. Literally, Anthony.
So, I mean, I don't see, if Pittsburgh is thinking rationally, they should be selling anything that's not tied down. But, Dubas is in a situation there where, Fenway Sports Group is like, well, we didn't sign up to dump at the deadline. And I'm like, okay, but if you're 9 points out of a playoff spot, we got to dump. It just makes too much. I mean, if we can't get Gensel signed, we've got to trade him.
They want that sweet, sweet playoff cake. Come on, Mike.
Yeah, I hear them, but the reality is if you're too far out, the math doesn't work. It just doesn't. But, I mean, but that's the interesting thing here. Edmonton, to my mind, Edmonton makes a ton of sense for Hanifin, but I don't think they have the cap room or the assets to trade. And do you think Calgary? I mean, okay, Calgary traded with Vancouver, so I guess anything.
Therefore, Mike, why not pivot to Philadelphia and Walker? The cost.
Well, but hold on, because I'm going to tell you why. Because Edmonton could put Broberg in that deal, and teams still like Broberg for however they're going to use him. And that's a big name that they could put in that deal as an example.
Even though they say they don't want to trade him, so they're playing hard.
No, that's the thing. You have to look at that and say, how do other teams view Broberg?
Right.
And he's been, listen, how long we've done this go around with Broberg in terms of since his draft here as to what exactly he is.
There's other teams that like them, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, is he Adam Boquist 2.0 where he gets traded and he goes to Columbus and he just turns out to be nothing? I mean, he might.
Let's be fair. A lot of guys who went to Columbus, Jake Bean, a lot of guys died there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it depends on where he goes, how he's developed. He's still young enough and I guess he's played well in Bakersfield, but who knows? But to my mind, if Ken Holland does anything, he's got to trade for a defenseman. But, if they go out and they trade for another forward, I give up. I mean, geez, you can score.
They're going to get a defense.
Get out of your friggin' net. You just can't do it. But
I don't think it's impossible for Walker, but he's probably third or fourth on the list. Like he's going to go down. He's going to shoot for the highest first.
I understand that, but again, we still have a week to go, and we'll see where that goes after a certain point. Because if you're looking at acquisition cost, Walker might not be as painful an acquisition in terms of what you have to give up, then obviously Hannafin would be.
But see, I think they're different because Hannafin is in the stratosphere now, and Hannafin's a lefty, and Hannafin's going to require player pick first rounder, whereas Walker might be at the top of the right-handed list now that Tanev and Lyubushkin are gone. I mean, I can't think
but this is going to be Ken Holland's last year. He's not even caring much about the future, honestly.
Yeah, but Jeff Jackson's not going to allow him to trade.
Oh, he's going to allow it, Mike, because they don't know how much longer McDavid's going to be there either.
Well, I'm telling you, McDavid's going to be there 2 more years, and then he's going.
So that's the thing. They're gonna do some things that maybe they wouldn't normally do.
McDavid's going to go to greener pastures.
Right, Los Angeles probably.
Los Angeles or New York or Chicago or Toronto. He's going to go to a big market and he's going to make big money. I mean, it's I'm not saying he's going to the Leafs because he could go to the Rangers. I mean, it would make a ton of sense.
Yeah, I don't see that happening, but he could go to the Leafs. He could. It's possible.
Hey, don't ruin my pipe dream over there, Russ.
Yeah.
I mean, Zibanejad's up in a couple of years. They'll have the cap space.
Listen, this is what happened. You have to wait until he's like Gretzky late in his career, and then he'll be a Ranger.
He had a pretty good year in '97 when they made the cup run. So
I just saw a picture of Gretzky in a Blues uniform sitting next to Brett.
Oh yeah,
it's just
yesterday was the day, right, when he got traded.
Yeah.
Now, Pete, Winnipeg, they didn't get Tanev. Are they still on the lookout for a defenseman?
Yeah, I believe so, and I think depending on who you talk to or who you believe within sort of the local inner circle, there's discussion that they could be in for another a top 6 forward, and they could be in for a depth forward too, depending on what it is. There is, after last night's game, I think there's a little more concern about where Cole Perfetti is going to fit under Rick Bowness right now.
Right.
He made a bit of a glaring error early on in that disaster of a first period. And Gabe Lardy was hurt too. And it looks like he's going to miss the game in Carolina as well. So we're not sure how serious that is, but you come in a week away from the deadline, it would seem that there should be some attention paid in that area as well.
He has a injury history too.
The interesting thing that the player that a lot of people want to see, the 2 players that people would want to see moved or expendable is Schmidt and Pionk. That's a hard one hard ones to get rid of. If you could find a taker with Pionk, you definitely would have to eat some salary or find a way to move it on. Well, the Jets do have some cap room. If you look at the top 6 right now, they're likely not going to sit a player who's making $5+ million a year, regardless of what they could get back. So I think just from how we know the Jets behave, if Chevy can find that deal that moves someone under term for, I think, another year after this one,
right,
he could do it. I don't think that's an easy task to do. I also don't believe that he will not look at things. But I would suspect any help on D is coming from within, which means they will probably bring up Hanola should he regain form in the AHL and bring him onto the roster.
Yeah, they messed him up. He was good a couple of years ago. He really was.
The thing is he made the team coming out of training camp. Like he did what he did what they said. Then he had, I think it was an Achilles or a hamstring injury.
Yeah.
So he's back skating. And I do believe that there was a comment from Bonus a few weeks ago that said it wouldn't be fair to him to bring him up right now, given the trajectory to come back. They know he's there, but he needs time. Like it's conditioning, it's timing, it's the whole thing. He's basically going through training camp again.
Okay.
So I think there is options. The better options for Chevy are to deal with potentially bottom 6 wingers, upgrade on Appleton, upgrade on Barron, because I think it's just an easier thing to do. And there's players like that out there that have noticeable upside and can round out. I think if you look at like last night, the Jets got taken to the woodshed by Dallas in the first period. It looked pretty bad. They look slow. And when you factor in, even though as solid as they've been, you've got potentially Edmonton, Colorado, and Dallas that you're going to, and Vegas, who you're going to have to manage if you're going to have any success in the postseason this year. They're not as fast as any of those teams. That's a big problem. And I don't know if you can address it at the deadline, but you can probably shore up your depth to make sure it's not as penetrable as it is right now.
Right. And in the West, I mean, I watched that LA Vancouver game, a couple periods of that game, and it was a really physical, rough and tough game. And, you know, LA's problems that they've displayed over the last couple months, they really didn't display much of it. And it was a bad game for Vancouver. But I look at the Kings, and it's sort of like, you know, the situation we're going to talk about in Boston, where there's one position we know that they need to add, and I just don't know whether the GM there is going to do it. They're just as much as the Devils need a goaltender, the LA Kings need a goaltender. Talbot played good last night, but they need a number one, and if they don't get a number one, they're not beating anybody in the playoffs. So I don't know, you know, if that's something that Blake can pull off, even if it's a Jake Allen and it's a stopgap fix, but they really need to get that goaltender. And if they don't, they're not going anywhere. Now, swinging east, Jan, the Rangers, I mean, you know, they've been one of the hottest teams since the All-Star break. There's not much going wrong for them. They're going to play Toronto tomorrow night. Everybody's talking about Matt Rempe versus Ryan Reeves. I think that's just a sideshow. I mean, it'll be interesting if it happens, but I don't think it's going to be, you know, like that's going to make the game or, you know, be a difference making situation. It'll be entertainment, but I look at that team and, you know, I keep saying third line center, maybe depth defenseman because Eric Gustafsson sucks. I mean, what do you think Drury's going to do?
Well, Michael, your Toronto fandom is showing through again, so thank you. I knew that was coming, but I'm not
he sucks.
Anyway, so not a couple of things. So first line right wing is still up in the air. I mean, they moved Kakko up there. I know there's a lot of rumors, right, with Pat Verbeek being in town, where they're showcasing Kakko to try to put him on that top line. My opinion, he actually fit better on the third line. He actually could be the alpha dog, quote unquote, on that line with Cooley and with Brodzinski. So I do think he'd probably be better there. I do think they're going to pursue a first-line right wing. And look, I would like Vetrano. What a lot of people who want Frank Vetrano have forgotten is, while he was great in the regular season to start the playoffs, take a look at what he did the last about 2+ rounds. He was completely invisible, and everybody seems to have forgotten the fact that he was invisible, right? But he would be a nice fit. The reason why they didn't sign him is because they just didn't have the cap space available to sign him at that time. The other name mentioned is going after Buchnevich again, which it's not going to happen because the cost to acquire would be vastly above what they got back in the original trade, which was a horrific return. But he would absolutely be a perfect fit because he was the right guy on that line. So I do think first line right wing is still in play. I think third line center is most certainly in play. The guy that had been mentioned a lot was Thomas Novak, but with Nashville getting back into contention and being in playoff contention right now, they're not moving Novak, even though he will be an unrestricted free agent after the year. So Vetrano's been mentioned. I do think look at Alexander Wenberg as a guy to probably consider. He's been mentioned a lot. It would be a good third-line center. Not a great scorer, but could be a third-line center. Obviously, Vetrano and Henrique could have been the package deal if the Rangers were going to go that route. And they do need a depth defenseman. I don't think there's any question, right? But it's going to be interesting to see when the defenseman dominoes stop falling, right? You've already gotten Lyubushkin moved. You've already gotten Tanev moved. You know Hannafin's going to get moved, right? Does Walker or Sealer get moved? Most probably not likely to the Rangers. And I know we discussed before, right? Scott Lawton for the Rangers as the third line center would make a lot of sense. He would fill a lot of needs, even though he's making $3 million for the next 2 years afterwards. But
if the Flyers would do it, yeah.
Well, that's what I was going to say. A, I don't know if the two teams would move it, and B, do it, and B, I don't know if the Rangers would want to give up a first rounder for him, though.
I don't think they would. I don't think they would.
But it would make a lot of sense to give him to fill certain needs. So I do think Drury's going to be aggressive. They have about $4 to $5 million in long-term space freed up with Kakko being out right now. Not Kakko, sorry, with Hedl being out right now. Right. And obviously they put Wheeler there, which adds to the mix a little bit, even though it's only about $1 million, though he did earn, I didn't think he come close or earned most of his performance bonuses, which are for next year about $300,000. But you're looking at about $5 million or so in cap space. So you can get creative and get a couple of guys in, especially if teams are going to eat room. So there are some needs, but 10-1 in February after a 5-8-1 January was a market improvement. Yeah. And they're 5 points ahead of Carolina as the month starts.
And Shesterkin is Shesterkin again. And you know, that's always a big factor.
The big thing they need a right winger. And honestly, The thing I wrote about is they needed to be Mika March, right? Zabinajad has got no 5-on-5 goals since December 23rd.
Yeah,
right.
He's not shooting as much as he used to, and he's right now overthinking. He's so concerned he's overthinking it. He gets a game where he gets like 2 goals, especially if they come at 5-on-5. I do think the floodgate's going to open for him.
Well, I agree. Here's my thinking on this. I mean, there's an easy deal to be made for Henrique, but I think if Verbeek's showing up, he's not showing up for that. I think he's showing up because if he's really pissed off about Zegras, about the way things were before the signing and the holdout and the injury, and he's like Yzerman, then he may be looking for Othman and Kakko and a Zegras deal, and maybe they throw in somebody else. But I could see something like that because I just think that's why Verbeek's showing up. He's not showing up for a Henrique deal. He's not.
So I've written this before, right? So look, you guys know I love Zegras. You guys know I'm a huge Zegras fan.
Yeah.
I don't think he fits Laviolette's system, first of all.
Oh,
Secondly,
no, he would.
Are you putting him as a third line center? Because I'm not separating Trocheck and Panarin right now.
He's going to be a first line winger. That's what he's going to be.
And then maybe
right wing.
Yeah.
Then maybe they convert him to center down the line.
Yeah, but he's not going to be a center for Laviolette. He'll be a winger. And he doesn't have to be first line. Remember, the Rangers have moved around a bunch of their guys, Kreider and otherwise. They can move them up and down. He'll be first or second line, but he'll be a winger. Yeah.
Okay. I mean,
look, Kreider's a bit.
I would hate to give up. I would hate to give up Othman just because I think of the upside potential that exists there. But if you're asking me in terms of the two to give up between Othman and Perreault, I'm probably giving up Othman before Perreault, given what we've seen to date.
Yeah, and the other thing about honestly, that is
the guy they may go after is Cooley. If they're coming to town to look at guys that are playing, right? You're coming to get an up close and personal look, probably at Cooley, as opposed to Othman.
I don't think they want to get rid of him because he's controllable and he's been very effective. Here's the thing, though, with Zegras, even though you may not want to give up, like you said, you wouldn't want to give up Othman, and I get it, right? You can sign Zegras. He's only got 1 more year after this.
I thought he signed a longer.
No, he signed a 2-year or 3-year deal, right? But I don't think it's a UFA. I don't think he's a UFA. I think he's still an RFA with Albright afterwards, right?
Right. That's my point.
Yeah, no,
you still have him under control, so that's why you wouldn't mind giving up Othman.
He's got 2 more years after this year at 5.75, and he's an RFA without arb rights.
Okay, that's perfect.
Right.
That's what you want. If you're going to give up a prospect and you want to make a run and you want to get somebody talented, that's what you do. That's the kind of guy you get.
Now, Verbeek made the deal with Philadelphia and got Gauthier, USA Hockey, and now, if he's talking to the Rangers, I'm sure he probably would like to get Perreault because.
Oh, I'm sure he would. I think with the strides that Perreault made this year, and I want to say I looked at a list that Mitch Brown put up at EP Ringside, and I want to say Perreault is 6th, maybe in college hockey in points per game, something like that. So.
Right.
And it may even be even strength points per game. I think it was even strength points per game. So I don't think they're going to move him now. I do think, and look, maybe Zach Jones gets thrown a deal because he's a USA guy too.
They're keeping him around. I mean, they just signed Mackey to a 2-year contract for $775, who I thought played well when he was up, and he obviously can fill that extra defenseman role. I think Jones is no question on the block, and I think Matthew Robertson is no question on the block. I just don't know the level of interest that teams are going to have in him because he hasn't been able to make it.
Well, that's why I think Anaheim would probably have the most interest in Jones.
But he's young enough. But they're both young enough. And again, if it's the Ducks and they have a young blue line already with Minterkoff and those guys, he could fit in a system that's a kind of more of an offensive-minded system.
Now, Peter, I look at the Bruins, and right now they're in a nip-and-tuck battle with the Florida Panthers. And I think the Panthers are a more complete team right now. They played better over the last 2 months. I mean, I couldn't believe the record that the Bruins had in February. They won 1 game in regulation. They've lost 5 games in overtime or shootout, and yet they're still tied with Florida. To my mind, and then they've struggled defensively, which is weird because they've been, Grzelcyk is hurt. I think Lindholm is hurt, But so they might be in on Hanifin. They might need Hanifin. I don't know if they have the assets for him, but I think their overall need is they need a number 1 or number 2 center. And I don't think there's anybody out there. I don't think you're going to waste your assets on Henrique, who I think is just a sort of a stopgap. So maybe they go for the defenseman and hope they can get through the playoffs with Zacha and Coyle as their top 2 centers.
I think they're getting a center. I think their defense is still pretty damn good.
Yeah. But
like,
the injuries.
Depth is still depth, right? Like it doesn't, if the player you'd like to get isn't there, you can still get depth that helps problems.
Right.
And sometimes having depth that isn't going to throw things off is also a good thing too. Depth that complements what you're doing, that can adapt to it. Sometimes you bring in the wrong, like you get a talented player, but the player doesn't fit with what you're doing. That's always the danger of going big with this stuff.
Sure.
And this is where losing Poitras really hurts them a lot, because he was the guy who would have been that depth guy that they could have just slid in the lineup.
Right.
And probably if they were going to go hunting, they might have gone bigger game hunting if they knew they had him as depth.
Well, I mean, they may go for like Toronto did with Lyubushkin. They brought in a guy that they knew. They brought in a guy who played with Riley and played well with Riley. Maybe Boston goes after a Sean Corrali or somebody like that who they can plug in as a 3-4. That might be the way that they go. Now, Toronto and Russ, and we'll finish on this. The interesting thing is, after all this talk about not trading their first round pick, Brad Treliving comes out today and says, well, depending on what the deal is, I might trade my first round pick. It was just simply, I'm not trading my first round pick for Chris Tanev.
Right.
That's what it was. But honestly, I don't see a deal out there for a rental. And even if it's Hanifin, because we know Hanifin's not going to sign in Toronto.
Yeah, there's no rental out there that I think is worthy for them to give up their first round pick, because they're going to. I mean, again, I think Treliving's smart enough to know they're going to need some of these picks in the next few years to keep this team going in 4 or 5 years. And if he doesn't know that, then he's going to be out before he ever gets a chance to see that.
Well, they have no draft cap. I mean, okay, the next year they have a 1 and a 3. The following year, they don't have a pick to the 5th round.
Yeah, that's insane.
Yeah, but that's all.
They should be getting some picks.
That's
back.
okay. You know what?
That's all on Kyle Dubas.
You know what? That's okay. Martin will get a couple first.
The funny thing is, everybody says that, but if he doesn't waive his no move clause, he's not going anywhere. And I'm sorry, I don't see him waiving his no move clause.
Guys, I got to jump off here.
All right, see you, Pete.
Sorry, people come over. You guys take care. Everyone have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
You too.
Yeah,
I agree. Oh, here we go. The worst look in podcasting right there.
No, this is the worst look right there.
Okay.
Well,
I can't argue with you on that one.
but
you're right.
I know Peter said that just to get a rise out of me, but that's something we'll talk about in the summer. If Mitch Marner doesn't want to go anywhere, he's not going anywhere. Right. So, but I don't think he's not trading a first round pick for a rental, but there are players out there that have a year or 2 left on contracts that, if they traded a first round pick, that would be, if there's somebody who's retainable, who upgrades their blue line, then I could see them do it. But I don't know a team out there okay, you're talking about Chychrun. Would Ottawa trade Chychrun to the Leafs?
I think Ottawa at this point in time would trade Chychrun if they could. I don't know whether or not the Leafs are going to
I think they would.
Given...
I actually think they would.
He's not playing very well in Ottawa right now.
No, that's what I was about to say. He's not playing well at all.
It doesn't matter. Everybody knows he can play, so.
We've heard that in Arizona before. That's what delayed the trade for a while.
I know,
also.
but look, is Jacob Chychrun a superstar? No. Are you going to give up a first for him? Yeah, you might, because he still could help your team a lot.
Agree. Yeah. It should be an interesting week. Again, Tanev obviously was tip of the iceberg. I still think we're going to get a ton of deals. I'm just hoping. The question is
there are going to be little deals, and people are going to be texting me, "Who is this guy? Who is that guy?" Like Schlepitz, who is this guy? Like that's what's going to happen next week, Jan. It's going to be
any of the guys. Any of the guys signed today worth a look for any team?
Oh, I didn't see who signed yet.
Those 4 guys I think that signed today.
Yeah, I'll give you the names before we end the show here, just to be informational here. Hold on one second, because Cap Friendly does have. So Mackey we mentioned, but he was Zach Funk.
Yeah, I don't know him very well.
Milo Rollins, Roelens. He's a forward out of the queue.
Right.
6 foot. What is it? 6 foot.
Funk is
five,
like a 209-pound forward.
Yeah, 6'6",
Washington.
200 pounds.
Yeah.
And he's got 62 points with Akadi Bathurst in the QM at JHL.
It's easy to score in the queue now, though. It is.
Right, and the last one is Max McHugh.
Where's he from?
Let's see here. Playing with the London Knights. 24 goals, 26 assists in 52 games.
Yeah, I'd seen him play a little bit. I think that's probably a good signing for who took him?
Columbus. Well, excuse me. The London Knights, Basil McRae, Rick Nash.
No, that's a good signing for them.
Probably future GM Mark Hunter. Now, what will be interesting, we'll finish on this. What will be interesting is the teams that have the ton of cap space and whether they'll actually use it. Meaning, Chicago has got $36 million in cap space. Could they, be a middleman on some of these deals? The Anaheim Ducks, the Buffalo Sabres have a lot of cap space. Whether these teams will actually, we know some of these teams want to contend, but you can always use draft picks. You can use draft capital to trade for players. So why not do those moves? And I'm wondering. Anaheim did it with Lyubushkin. They retained 50%. But will Buffalo act as a middle? And Buffalo will retain on guys like Eric Johnson or Victor Olofsson. But
Buffalo should act as a middleman. I think the Flyers will, at least on one deal. I still think we're going to see some middlemen. Yeah.
All right. We'll end the show there. We will be back on Monday with another edition of the Hockey Buzzcast for the departed Anthony Mangione and the departed Pete Tessier, and for Jan Levine, who is not departed, and Russ Cohen, if he keeps saying things about me, close-ups of me should be departed. I'm Michael Agello. Thanks for watching the show, and remember, without the buzz, it's just hockey.